Hello everyone, it's AG and today I will be talking about books concerning race and racism. But before I start, first, the outfit. So I'm wearing this shirt that I bought about a year or two ago from Reserved, and the skirt is one that my sister gave me after I had hijacked it several times from her closet, and it's from Topshop. Yeah, so that's it for clothes today. So a while ago I had said on my Instagram page that I planned on reading more books with regards to race and racism here on my channel to basically create a space where we can educate ourselves and learn from one another and have discussions and just find ways, to move forward and basically improve the world. Yeah. And so people have been asking me, well, which books are you going to be reading? And I thought it would be nice to just make a video about that. Also, if you would like to have more of a real-time update of what I'm reading, I would suggest you follow me or befriend me on Goodreads, because I update that at least once a day or so. Yeah, so I think most of the books that are being bought at this moment are How to Be Anti-Racist, White Supremacy and Me, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and So You Want to Talk About Race. And I will probably be reading those in the future, but for now I mainly am going to be reading books that are a bit lesser known, which is good if you haven't bought any books right now because most of them have been sold out. So let's talk about the books. First, I have The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. I know this is a very well-known book, but in my opinion, I feel that it is still rather underrated. Anyway, this book is both a historical and sociological examination of African Americans, the effects of racism, the aftermath of emancipation, and the multiple ways in which African Americans have been hindered by the system, preventing them from fully recovering from the disastrous effects of slavery. It features memoir, poetry, song, and much more. However, I have been struggling with properly digesting everything in this book. I think a lot of that stems from not being American myself and thus knowing very little about the history. And so I decided to buy a reader's guide and put it away for now until it arrives so I can read it simultaneously and then be able to make a video for that. Then I have Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri, and this serves as both a great title as well as a public service announcement for all of the people who ever considered to touch a black person's hair without consent, because I can tell you there are a lot more people out there than you would expect. I should also note that the American title for this book is Twisted, and it also has a different cover. So this book is very interesting because it explores the many ways in which black hair has been used and still is being used as a tool of oppression. For instance, it talks about how white people didn't consider black hair to be actual hair. It was described as some sort of wool because of the texture, and this in turn enabled them to associate us more to sheep and thus to livestock, which of course aided the argument that we were not really human, and so we were more like livestock, and thus that kind of justified slavery as a whole. And to this day, there is just a multitude of ways in which people use our hair to oppress us. Anywhere from deeming your hair to be unprofessional to flat out banning kids from going to school with their natural hair. And I feel because of this, almost every black person has had some sort of history with their hair. For instance, for me, I always felt that I needed to chemically relax my hair because then I'd be pretty, because I would have white people's hair. And that was kind of an idea that I had at age 7, 6. And so years after crying and screaming, my parents had my hair relaxed. And obviously this is a chemical process which is incredibly damaging for your hair. So my hair was at age 11, it was till here, and then it broke all the way till here when I was like 16 or so. And that was the time where I thought, you know what, screw all of this. And I literally cut off all of my hair. And now we're here with these luscious strands. So yes, I just think that this is a very interesting book, and I would love to have conversations surrounding it, which is why I'm going to be reading it. And I actually have read a huge chunk, and it's like really interesting, so I would definitely recommend the book. Now moving on to another book that I have already read a huge chunk of, it is Biased by Professor Jennifer L. Aberhart. Aberhart is a social psychologist who is currently a professor at the Department of Psychology of Stanford University. She has conducted several experiments concerning racial bias, which she also touches upon in the book. She also thoroughly explores how unconscious bias really shapes our world and views. The publisher William Heinemann gifted me a copy last year, and so I had read like the first 100 pages until I was really just triggered by some of the things in the text, because it does deal with police brutality as well. And yeah, at the moment I just wasn't ready to read it, but now I feel that I can take it, and I am really wanting to talk about like this unconscious bias, because I think that pretty much everyone is aware of racism, whether or not they deem it to be good or bad. But I think that people are not very aware of unconscious bias, and that is something that I know I myself have, because basically everyone has it. And so I think it's very important to be aware of that, trying to identify it, and just improve as a human being. Then I have The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. And this is a book mainly focusing on diversity within media, such as television, film, and literature. There is a huge lack of characters of color within these media, and the thing is that once you see them, they are often marginalized or brutalized. I think, like all of us know, that with a horror movie, if there's a black person in that movie, rest assured they are going to get killed in like the first half an hour, that's for sure. They are definitely not making it to the end of the movie. Actually, Roy Wood Jr. from The Daily Show made a video about this, which I thought was very funny, but at the same time also disheartening. And it basically just showcases all these movies in which you have a black character and how they all die like instantly. There's this one movie where like the only black person, I think it was like Scream 4 or 3, and they died even before like the beginning credits came on, and it was just like, wow, okay. Yeah, it's really, really bad, but I will put a link in the description box so you can check that out. But anyway, the book itself, it takes 4 examples of like characters of color in film, TV, and literature, and really examines them closely. So you have The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, Merlin, and The Vampire Diaries. And growing up, I was a huge fan of The Vampire Diaries and The Hunger Games, so that's definitely nice that I can now read this book and kind of like understand these characters better and the role that they played in the story, as well as why I was so incredibly devastated when it came to Rue, and also why I never really identified with what's her name. I even forgot her name. You see, like the Black Witch, like the only black girl in that series. Yeah, so that would be very interesting to look at. Then I have The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. And this book basically is an entire history of race. At least That is what I understood from the synopsis and the reviews. The book explores how race became to be what it was, because even though the concept of race is incredibly prevalent in our time, that hasn't always been the case within history. Race is something that was invented in the 18th century, and race really only became important in the time of imperialism, colonization, industrialization. And important to note is that when saying that race was invented, I'm referring to the fact that before the 18th century, the concept that we have now really didn't exist. So I'm not saying that people before that time didn't have different skin color or like different cultures, etc. Anyway, this book really is a history lesson in itself, and it starts with the Greeks moving forward in time. Then the last physical book that I have is They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. Ever since I heard about this book, I really wanted to read it. Definitely now with the rise of the Karens to internet infamy, I think it's good to look at the role that white women have played historically in the oppression of black people, specifically their role within enforcing and upholding slavery. For a very long time, and even till this day, it is widely regarded that white women didn't really have an active role when it came to slavery, when in actuality they did actively participate. Jones Rogers had a lecture on this book, and at some point she talks about how there was a demand amongst white women for female slaves to use as both nurses and wet nurses for their children. In the video, you can see ads that feature that aspect as a selling point. It is further also known that these women were not only on the side of the demand, they were supplying these female slaves as well. So if you're interested in listening to that entire talk, I have left a link to it in the description box below. Then finally, I wanted to talk about a book that I am really excited about, but hasn't come in yet, and it is Afropean by Johnny Pitts. It is an exploration of Black Europe, which I think is a group that very often gets overlooked. When people talk about racism, it often concerns African Americans and just racism within America, and as a result people feel like there's no racism in Europe. I mean, I would be a millionaire if I would get even 10 cents for every single time that someone told me that racism doesn't exist in Europe. It most certainly happens. It's just that it doesn't get discussed widely. Pitts decided to travel throughout Europe and to basically document the experiences of Europeans of African descent, how they live their lives, trying to manage multiple allegiances and creating new identities for themselves. And so as a Nigerian Dutch person, I feel like this is such an interesting topic. I don't think I've ever before come across literature that explores experiences that are so close to my own. So this is definitely, regardless of how the book will be, it is something that I definitely will be discussing here on my channel. Anyway, Pitts went to the Netherlands, France, Russia, Germany, Portugal, Sweden and Belgium. And so I just think it's so cool that he covered so many different countries, because for instance I can imagine how an African Dutch experience is completely different from an African Swedish experience. So like I said, this is one of the books I'm most looking forward to. And those were all of the books that I wanted to talk about. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I hope that some of these have piqued your interest. If you enjoyed the content that I make, perhaps consider joining my Patreon. I run a monthly book club there where we discuss diverse classics, which is loads of fun. You can also support me by perhaps getting me a coffee or just subscribing, liking and commenting. Either way, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.